Philosophy is never meant to be comfortable. Sometimes it's complicated. Sometimes it's rather weird. But in many cases, it is there to question something or someone. Throughout history, some philosophers have pushed the envelope so hard that that philosophy turned into something else. These philosophers didn't just challenge conventional ideas, they dismantled them, leaving behind a legacy that is both brilliant and, in its own right, controversial. Ayn Rand is one such philosopher. Born in 1905, she was a Russian-American writer and philosopher who could easily be considered the embodiment of late-stage capitalism if she weren't so polarizing. Her philosophy, Objectivism, champions individualism, self-reliance, and the pursuit of one's own happiness as the ultimate moral duty. But perhaps more than anything, it elevates selfishness to the status of the highest virtue, making it central to her worldview. In Rand's philosophy, altruism, the act of prioritizing the well-being of others, is not just a weakness, it is a moral failing. For her, the notion that one should sacrifice one's own happiness for others is not just misguided, it is an immoral act. The essence of objectivism lies in the belief that human beings should act in accordance with their rational self-interest, with no obligation to help others unless it benefits them directly. Rand's most famous work, Atlas Shrugged, encapsulates these principles. The novel is a sprawling allegory of a world in which government overreach, collectivism, and moral decay threaten to destroy individual achievement and innovation. In it, the heroes are unapologetically selfish industrialists and entrepreneurs, driven solely by the desire to succeed and thrive. The book, first published in 1957, has been both hailed and condemned. To her supporters, Rand's work is a manifesto of free market capitalism and individual freedom. It has inspired generations of libertarians, capitalists, and advocates of minimal government intervention who view her ideas as a defense of personal liberty and innovation. Critics, however, see her philosophy as little more than a justification for unchecked greed and exploitation. To them, Rand's objectivism promotes an ethos of survival of the fittest, with no regard for the social contract or the needs of the less fortunate. In a world where her ideal society reigns, the weak and vulnerable are left to fend for themselves, while the powerful flourish. Critics argue that Rand's vision of the world is dangerously divisive and lacks empathy for those who face hardships beyond their control. Despite these criticisms, Rand was unapologetic. She once said, "The question isn't who is going to let me, it's who is going to stop me," revealing her complete disregard for opposition. Rand's personal life, much like her philosophy, was turbulent and filled with contradictions. Despite espousing rational self-interest, her relationships were anything but rational. One of the most well-known and controversial aspects of her personal life was her affair with Nathaniel Brandon, a younger man who was once a close associate and protege. Their passionate relationship was secret for a time, but when it came to light, it caused a scandal within Rand's inner circle. The affair, however, wasn't the end of the story. When Brandon eventually ended the relationship and began a romance with a younger woman, Rand's reaction was one of jealousy and rage, emotions that seemed to undermine the very philosophy of emotional detachment and self-mastery she espoused. Rand's behavior toward Brandon and others close to her, including her treatment of friends who criticized her ideas, often suggested a lack of the rational self-interest she so fervently advocated. She could be vengeful, even cruel when crossed, and her personal vindictiveness stood in stark contrast to the supposed virtues of objectivism. In many ways, Rand's life mirrored the very contradictions she built into her philosophy, a fervent belief in individualism and self-interest, yet an inability to maintain harmonious relationships based on those same principles. In the end, Ayn Rand remains a deeply polarizing figure. She was a champion of capitalism, individualism, and personal freedom, but her ideas also raised questions about the cost of unchecked selfishness and the limits of individualism in a complex society.